to look at how to use Sculpt and how to use the Sculpt tools to do a really bad job making a horse head. And the reason we're going to do such a bad job is I am going to try and make this quick and efficient to show the tools, not necessarily to take the time it takes to actually accurately model a horse head, but I want to show you some of the techniques and some of the basic ideas. So to start with, right, you want reference images. You want some way to think about the object that you're working on. And if you've ever looked at those old drawing books that are like how to draw a horse or how to draw animals or how to draw this or that, they pretty typically start with, right, sketching out some basic shapes, right? You can see these light lines of a small circle here, a small circle here. If we look at horse heads, this is actually kind of, you can start to imagine a cylinder here, right? And you can, because this is so straight and, squarish, you can imagine this is a polygon object, right? And you can kind of imagine another lump here. The face thins a little bit, right? But it's kind of this trapezoidal shape here in the middle, and it tapers up to the top of the head and then down to the neck, right? So with this, right, and if we look at some of these others, if you do a search online, you can find all sorts of other examples of varying quality on how to start to get the basic shape of a horse's head down. And so, right, we want to think in the same way when we're working with 3D models of organic forms. What are those basic shapes? What are the primitives they're closest to? Because then what we can do is we can put those primitives together, put them into a volume builder and then a volume mesher, and then remesh that to get a nice even mesh that's reasonably low poly, which becomes a perfect starting place for us to work with, to sculpt from, to texture, to UV unwrap, all of that in a way that's sane and doesn't make us want to lose our minds completely. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to open up a new scene in Cinema. And in this first section of the tutorial, we're just going to rough out the horse head with some basic shapes. So let's go ahead and get started. To start with, right, we know we probably want a cylinder, right, for the jaw of the horse. We want something that's got a reasonably hard edge. I'm going to flip this so it's in the X plus. Perfect. We want to choose our axis of symmetry, right? And with Sculpt, with all the things that we're doing right now, it makes our life so much easier if we just leave everything centered in the world, right? We don't want to, unless I might lift this up and down, but I definitely don't want to move it right and left. I want everything to basically be locked in place on the x-axis at this point. Okay, so I want to just keep this in the, right, I don't want to have my x value drift off of 0. Now, if I ever get concerned, right, I can always select cylinder, I can go to coordinates or whatever object I have selected and just make sure that my, x value is 0, right? Y and Z can be anything based on where this needs to be for the shape of the head. So I'm actually going to pull this back a little bit and I'm going to lift it up a touch, right? Because I want this head to, let's see here, we'll look at this in the right view, that should be fine. All right, because this is going to be part of the head. I may want to make this a little bit bigger, but that should be good for now. Now, if we look back at our references, right, the front of the muzzle is more, you could imagine this as a sphere, right? There's a lot of detail there that makes it not spherical, but you could imagine that as a sphere. So we're going to go ahead and use a sphere for the front. And again, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to this view for the time being. Make a sphere. Right, that is absolutely enormous, so I'm going to shrink it down. Now, again, I'm not doing this to scale. And I could bring a reference image in, so I could actually line this up on the reference image, which would probably be a wise choice, but I am just going to eyeball this so that we can go reasonably quickly. Okay, so I've got my two base shapes, right? And so now I need something that's going to, right, bridge the space, from here to here and then come back down this direction. There's a couple different ways that I could do that. In my case, I think I'm just going to start with a cube. And I'm going to adjust these dimensions pretty quickly until it's thinner than the jaws, right? If I go ahead and look here, you can see that this does taper a lot. It really depends. Obviously, the horse breed makes a big difference too. But you can see, right, in any of these sketches, whether or not they're physically accurate to the way a horse's face looks, this tends to stick out more than than the cube. Part of it does. And so I'm going to go ahead and just start by making this, again, right? It's a primitive. It's like this building block that I'm using. I'm going to rotate it some. I'm going to go ahead and scale this down just a touch more, and maybe pull this in just a touch as well, right? And all I'm doing is I'm getting this set sort of reasonably close, right, to where I want this to be. It's not going to be perfect, and there's several changes I'm going to need to make. All right, if we look back at the horse, at the references, specifically these, I don't think I can zoom in that much more on this, and I don't really want to click on it. But you can see, right, it kind of tapers in, fans out at the eyes, and tapers back in again. And there's this nice center line down here, and that's something that I might want to keep in mind as I'm modeling this. So I'm going to go ahead and say display Gerard shading lines. I'm going to go to my cube and select it again. So I have the settings up. I'm going to go to Object tab, and I want to make sure that there is at least a center line down the middle of this, which is going to give me some freedom to change things. And I might want to even potentially have at least one or two cross sections on this, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this editable and then make those final adjustments until it's about right. Now, once I do this, let's go ahead and, oops. There we go. Okay. Now, once I do this, I don't know how I drag it all the way over there. I'm going to go ahead and see which edge I want. I don't really, you know what? It might be good to have one seam on the side here, one seam down the center here, and maybe two seams here, which you can't really see the second one because it's hidden away, but there should be another subdivision lurking somewhere inside the head right now. Okay, so we've got some basic subdivisions down. Now, as soon as I start this next phase of building this, I'm going to want to make a couple of changes to how I'm modeling, and one of those is going to be to enable symmetry. When I enable symmetry, I want to click on the gear. I want to make sure it says symmetry, show planes, and I'm doing this all along the Z plane, so I want to maybe make sure that's what I want to do. Planar, context, local, 1 centimeter, okay. And once I've done that, I still can't see the planes. That's totally fine right now. But what I want to do is let's start by making our cube editable, right? Eventually, we're going to make this sphere editable as well, but we're going to start by making this cube editable. So I'm just going to hit C, and then I'm going to go to polygon mode, and I am in the wrong axis. So let's go ahead and change this back. X was what I wanted, not Z. That's the plane of symmetry that we want for this object, right? Because what I want to do is if I'm moving a single point here, I want to be able to do it. I want to be doing that on both sides and keep this symmetrical because, right, horses are symmetrical. All right, so let's go ahead and start in the top view, and let's just, maybe we'll just widen this out. I actually may need all 4 views just to be able to see what the heck's going on here. Okay, so we're going to go, and we're going to go to points mode instead of polygon mode. And let's start by selecting this point here. I want to make sure that if I'm using the live selection, the brush selection tool, I have visible only selected. And now I'm just going to go ahead and pull this point up, and you can see it's doing this, but what I may do in this case, right, is actually I probably should have this unselected. So I can click over here, click there, grab all of those points, and start to pull them up together. I'm going to do the same thing here and just lift these up until it's really kind of close to the front edge of the face there. Maybe pull it back a little bit. I'm going to leave this point, actually, those points right where they are. They're in a really good spot. However, these, I think, need to be pulled up just a touch. This part of the face is actually thins out a little bit too, so I'm going to shrink that down. And then these, right, they're sticking through that top surface of the sphere, so I definitely want to drop that down a little bit. Okay, so, right, already I've got something that's starting to look like a horse robot thing. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to take my sphere and I want to make this editable as well, but before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the type from standard to hexahedron. And I want you to note what that does to the surface of the sphere, right? You can imagine a hexahedron sphere as basically an inflated cube, right? You can kind of see where these edges come together here. This would be the top surface of the cube and the different sides, right? It's just like puffed out. And I don't need 32 subdivisions for this because we're going to be putting this into a volume builder, so it doesn't really matter how many facets all of this has. It's just what's going to make the modeling easiest. And in this case, right, a perfect sphere isn't exactly what we want, right, for this muzzle. We want this to be squished in just a little bit more narrow, so it's a little bit taller than it is wide. So I'm going to make this editable, and I'm in points mode now. Now, this time, what I may want to do is I could, at this point, actually just go to model mode and use my use the scale tool, and I could just scale the sides in just a little bit here, right? And that probably is going to do everything that I need to do for the purposes of making this this default model. Now, the other parts, right, we had talked about is that if we take a look at our reference, right, it kind of tapers down to the nose pretty flatly until you get to the eyes, and then that's the widest point, and then it drops back in. So with this cube, what I may want to do is I may want to taper these corners in a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and select my cube again, select these points, and I have these points selected, but what I would like to do is also come over here and use my brush selection tool, hold down Shift, select all of those points at the end of the nose, hit the letter T so I can use my scale tool, and then taper all of these in a little bit more. Right, so you can see I've tapered this in some. I might at this point want to move everybody up just a touch maybe, but I don't even think I want to do that. I think I just want to leave it tapered like that. Then I'm going to want to grab these points here, and so I may want to go to this side and just grab all of these, hit the letter T, and pull these out just or maybe tuck these in. I can't even see. Let me just rotate this view a little bit so I can see better. Yeah, sorry, we want to tuck these in a little bit so it's more straight. Then we want to do the same thing out here. We want to grab the 6 points on the sides of this part, and so I'm going to go ahead and select these and maybe reselect that, make sure I have all those points selected, hit the letter T, and go ahead and expand this out a bit more. This is about where the eyes are going to be on the side of this head, but I don't want to go out too far, right? And especially at the bottom. So maybe what I do is I go out a little bit here, select this, maybe I just grab those top points to start with and use my scale tool and pull this out so it is as wide as the head can be. And then maybe I go down to these mid points here, the letter T, and spread these out a touch more. But this way I still have a nice strong jawline there as a basis for the geometry that I'm going to continue to work on. Oops, and you don't want to do that. Okay. And now, the muzzle is like a little bit too big, and maybe it just needs to be moved. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to go to model mode. I'm going to use the move tool to start with. I'm going to pull this up and in like that just a little bit. Then I'm going to use my scale tools. I'm just going to scale this down just a tiny bit in this direction. So I'm going in both dimensions, right? Not all three, but the X and the Z dimension it's getting scaled in. I'm going to use the letter E or the move tool to pull this up a little bit closer. rotate my view around and say, oh, it actually does need to go up a little bit more, like that. And maybe it needs to be scaled this way now a little bit too. There we go. Right? And I could go up a little bit more. I could taper these ends in a touch more, but I think I'm just going to leave it as it stands now and we'll see what happens. Okay. So now we're not, something you may note, well, one, I want to make sure this edge isn't sticking through there. So I am going to go back to my cube. I'm going to go to points mode. I'm going to use my brush selection tool, select those points. Just tuck these into the head just a little bit. And that's mainly because I just don't want to have to worry about there being a any sort of like major breakdown. Now I'm pulling this up just to see if that looks more horse-like. Like one, basically I was here and just pulling it one further iteration up, one further subdivision up, seems to have made, you know, a noticeable change in the face. Okay, so also note we're not doing a neck right now, we're not doing ears, we're just focusing on the skull at this point. Okay, so let's go ahead and start to put this into a volume builder. So I'm going to go ahead and save my scene. I'm just going to call this Horsey McHorsehead or something like that. We'll just step this back out to here and just call it Sculpt Horse. Never look a sculpt horse in the mouth. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And then let's go ahead and make our volume builder. We will grab all three of these objects and we're going to make them children of the volume builder. You will see we get right our voxelated head, which I don't know if voxelated is a word, but it should be. Somebody should be the voxelator. All right, and now let's go ahead and put this in a volume mesher. And we'll see what we get, right? Okay, so we've lost a lot of detail. We do have a general shape here, but it's not super great right now. So let's go to our volume builder, and right now the voxel size in the volume builder is 10 centimeters. I'm going to go ahead and make this 5, right? And so now a lot more of that original definition is coming back in. Things are kind of looking okay-ish. We could do a smooth, there's a lot of things we could do at this point. We could also adjust the smoothing of these different children. So you can see if I crank the cube up, it actually is going to inflate the whole thing, right? But I might want to adjust that a tiny bit. Maybe I want to inflate the sphere a touch at the front of the muzzle. Let's see what happens there. I'm not seeing a whole lot of change. Let's see if I can crank this up and get anything more interesting. It looks like because it's in union with all of this other stuff, if I change this order, there we go. Maybe this will, there we go. All right, so order makes a big difference. This is about the same level, but that should be pretty good. You can see there's some weird geometry here probably because the side of that cube is really close to the surface there. I'm not going to worry about that too much. I do think we should taper the bottom of the jawline in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and select my cube. And you can see I can still access all these points, especially if I'm in points mode. So I'm going to select that point. I'm going to hit the letter T. And I'm just going to pull these in just a few little bits. You can see already how that's really making, you know, a much deeper cut in there. It looks a little bit more accurate. And again, we're going to be able to make a lot of changes on this as we go. And the other thing I might do is I might go ahead and select this point that's kind of near the bottom here and just kind of tuck this up a little bit as well. That should probably do it. Just to make this a little bit more, you know, a little bit more horsey. Okay. Oh, and the other thing is you know, every horse I've seen tends to have at least a little bit of a ridge running down the center of the snout. So maybe I need to grab these edge points here and just pull them down just a little bit to create some of the bridge of the, and maybe make this just a little bit more prominent here. You can see, right, how that's already impacting the shape of that head. Now, we could always do a better job, but this is a really good starting place. And again, right, the more time we take doing this, the more we learn about it, the deeper we can go with some of these things. Okay, so let's say we want to do, before we get to sculpting, there's a couple other things we need to do to this model, which is basically we want to make sure we get nostrils in there and we get the start of a mouth as well. And so to get nostrils in there, let's go ahead and create a sphere. And in this case, right, obviously this is far too large, so we will take our radius and just make it way smaller. I can see in my side view here, yeah, 11 centimeters is probably good. And then, my view here is crooked, so if I just go here and say frame default, it'll fix that for me. But let's go ahead and move this down. Now, this is one of those times where, right, we don't want a nostril right in the center line. We actually want two nostrils. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a symmetry generator, which is under the subdivision surface. And over here, same butterfly that we see up here. But this time we can drop the sphere in there. And then if I was to move the sphere, right, now we've got two nostrils. Look at that. Now, obviously, they are the opposite direction we would like them to go into this model. And let's go down a little bit, pull these in a little bit, and I'm going to make them a little bit larger. Like, let's do 13 centimeters. There we go. Okay. Now, the other thing with horse nostrils, if we go over here and look at our reference drawings, right, is they're not necessarily round. They're actually a little bit more oval shaped. And so to start with, just to make our lives a little easier, we're going to go ahead and select that sphere. We're going to make it editable. We are going to go to object mode. We're going to hit the letter T to scale. And let's just go ahead and scale these in a little bit. And then I think what we would need to do at this point is maybe scale the whole thing up. There we go. Look at that. Okay, so those are looking more horsey, a little cartoonish, but more horsey. And again, right, this isn't the best horse that's ever been modeled in the history of all horses. We're just trying to use this to learn the tools. Okay, so that should probably be good. So then what we need to do is we need to bring our symmetry down and make it a child of our volume builder. And I'm making it the top child for a reason, just because then it's this last thing and it makes it a little bit easier to do things too. But we're going to change the mode here in our volume builder where it says for our symmetry object to subtract, right? And so that is going to subtract some nostrils into the head of this. And you can see that maybe they're a little too big right now and too close together. Or we could adjust our voxel size. We could go a little bit smaller. I could say 2.5. And right, we could get, significantly harder lines on this thing. You can kind of see, what that's looking like. I don't think that's really helping us that much. I'm going to go up to 3. That might be a little bit nicer. Your computer might start getting angry at some point around here. But so then, right, at this point, it's like, okay, well, they are a little big and maybe a little close together. So I'm going to use the scale tool and I'm going to scale these down just in this direction because I like how big they are the other way. That looks a little bit better. I know from looking at the reference images, I think they're actually a little bit wider set in the face than I have them. So I'm just going to scoot them out just a touch as well. Okay. So you can see we've got these, you can kind of see a like slightly pixelated edge around here. If I was to select my volume builder and pull out this this radius here, you can see I can smooth that like more than is helpful. But if I do about 3.6 centimeters, that seemed to have softened it up a little bit. Now the other part is I would like to make it so the mouth is kind of open. This is going to be a silly looking horse, but that's all right. And so I could, there's different options for what to use to kind of create that cavity. I could use another sphere in there, or I could use a cylinder or some other, I mean, I could use a cube, it doesn't really matter. I think I'm going to go cylinder and we'll just see what happens. So I'm going to go flip that into the X orientation. Doesn't matter if it's plus or minus at this point. I'm going to scale this down a fair amount, drag this down so it's about, you know, where it's almost like a bit that the horse is chomping on. I'm going to make it like smaller than I want it to be to start with, and then we'll scale it up or do whatever we need to do to make this work. So now I can make this a child of my volume builder. And again, I can select the volume builder, set this to subtract, right? And now I've got a hole, you know, right through his face. This is a really great way to make cavities and holes. Like if you're doing a skull and there's, right, like the bottom bone that goes around the eye socket, right, isn't fully connected, you know, behind itself to the rest of the skull. So you could do cutouts and things like that. I am going to go ahead and pull this out a little bit more and pull this down, and you can kind of see, again, it's a little bit cartoonish at this point. I could always make this editable and then extend one dimension of this, rotate it a few degrees, and get maybe a better result. And again, this is the start of this, right? We're just trying to get, you know, most of their mouths are closed in these, but right, let's say we're trying to get, we want the mouth open for some reason. I don't know what that reason would be, right? But we're getting someplace where we can push in and create more of a cavity. I do want this to be up a little bit higher and maybe rotated a few more degrees so that I have like a little bit more jaw to work with when I go into sculpt. And this is something that you kind of learn as you go and make multiple mistakes like continuously. Okay, that's a terrible looking horse. Fantastic. The last thing we need to do is we need to add some eye sockets, which are going to be equally horrible, but that's all right. So let's go ahead and grab some spheres, and we are going to again shrink this. We're going to do basically the same set of steps for the nostrils to make these eye sockets, but this time we're going to want to duplicate this because we want to keep eyeballs that we will put in the sockets and then use the eyeball as the thing that subtracts the socket as well. So we'll need 2 copies of this once we get done, but let's go ahead and put this in a symmetry. So we've got our symmetry. We're going to drop our sphere in there. And we will move this up to about eyeball position on our head, which is somewhere over here. Pull these out, right? Look at how horsey that looks. I'm going to move this up a little bit. And I don't know where on the head this should actually go. Let's go ahead and take a look at these references, right? Somewhere in here, it's basically a little forward of like the center line if this was a thing, but we're a little bit too far. So horse eyes are probably further up on the head. Again, this is going to be a silly, silly looking horse. Let's go ahead and continue on our merry way. Okay. So we've got eyes here. So let's go ahead and we'll just change the symmetry name to eye. And then we're going to go ahead and copy this and paste it. We'll drag eye.1 down into the volume builder. We're going to call this socket. And then we will come over here and we're going to change this to a subtract. Right now you'll see again, maybe my eyes need to be a little bit smaller. So let's go to this sphere and we're going to say, okay, I'm going to make this 16. And I'm going to go ahead and make my sockets 16 centimeters as well. Okay, that's a little bit better. I do want to say grab both. Let's see if I can grab both of these. I'm going to select the sphere here, hold down Command, select this other sphere and move them both out at the same time. And then maybe we'll just pull these down just a touch. And part of this is to give us a little bit more freedom, right, as we start to model, when we go in and model like all the detail around the eye sockets, right? Okay. And then let's go ahead and turn the eyes off so we can just see the sockets. And it looks like we've got some decent sockets, but let's go ahead and see if we can smooth this just a little bit. So we're going to select the volume builder, come here and just add oh, look at that, 4.8 centimeters. We get a much cleaner result. And let's just make sure our eyes still fit into our heads. They're a little bit more pushed out than they probably should be. And eventually we would want to like create an eyelid and all of that, which we're not going to do. This is going to be scary, creepy horse. Okay. So this is still pretty squared off and there's probably some problems with this, but we're at a good spot to save it. And now what we're going to do is we are going to hide the eyes. Let's turn off our symmetry so we don't have to look at those planes anymore, which for some reason are still showing. Let's go ahead and uncheck show planes. Okay, it looks like maybe the planes are coming in here. Turn that off. Turn that off. There we go. Okay, and turn that off. And then I'm going to go to this view. Okay, so I've got this all set, and we are going to go ahead and I don't know what this one edge is here that's not on the other side. That's strange, but that's something we can fix in sculpting. Okay, so we've got this. So let's go ahead and take all of this and put it into a remesher. So we're going to go to our subdivision surface. We're going to go down to remesh. We are going to take the volume mesher, drop it in as a child of the remesh. Once we do that, we've got a couple changes we need to make. First, with the remesh, we need to say this should be symmetrical along the, I think, x-axis. Let's try and see what happens. Yes. So now you can see, right, we should have a good, uniform, even mesh where there's a center line down the center of the head. That's going to make all of our sculpting and the symmetry of our sculpting so much easier as we go. You can see already it smooths a lot of things out, but we do have some areas where there's a lot denser polygons near hard edges than there are in other surfaces, and that's something that we definitely don't want when we're sculpting. We really want these to be uniform to start with, because that will make our life so much easier and allow us to not have details get tighter and smaller in weird places. So I'm going to go ahead and set my mesh density down pretty low and just see what we get. Okay, this actually looks surprisingly good. It'd be nice if these two edges didn't come to a hard corner. So maybe what I can do is grab this cylinder up here, and maybe I can hit the letter T, and maybe if I just scale this way a bit, there we go. Can you see how it really depends on where I'm at. But if somewhere in here, I get these edge polygons, and now they're a little bit, oops. Let's try this again. I clicked on something horrible. Oh, that's not good. You know what? I'm going to go with that. That's a lot better. The reason I want that additional, those flat planes there, I don't know why that keeps happening, is that it just is going to make it easier to do inflation and some of the other tools here that I'm going to need to use to make this horse head look a little bit better. Okay, right, so I've set this down. Now, when I did this, I just sort of went freestyle, but it's at 22%. I have an even mesh, right? And this is like a good number of polygons to start as a base mesh for sculpting. right? Because what you do with sculpting is you have your base mesh and then you essentially create a bunch of different layers of more subdivisions, and you can edit each of those layers of mesh density or whatever independent of one another, and you can blend them all together, and they have like an additive effect when you put them all together. And so you want to start with something that's reasonably simple, and then that you can then build on as you go. Okay, so we've got this basic head shape down. Let's go ahead and save it. And we could go through and do like multiple passes with the remesh. In this case, we might try it one more time, but I have saved this. I'm going to collapse this all down. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it. And the one that I've pasted, I'm going to hide the original. And because I just want to see, like, let's run this through a remesh one more time. But if I do that, I don't want to run it through the remesh on top of all this other stuff we've got going on. We want to make it a polygon object and then remesh that. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say connect objects and delete. So now I just have this polygon object that is my horse head here. So let's go ahead and drop this into a remesh again and just see. If we go into this remesh, we select this, we drop the adaptive down to 0. You can see at 100%, I'm starting to lose, let's do symmetric X. That cleans things up a little bit. I'm starting to lose some stuff even before I drop this mesh density down. And I think if I go any lower with the way I have things set, it's really going to create some problems, maybe specifically in there. Those are things I could go back and change in the base model, right? Which is why you would always do this and not just get rid of it. But I don't think this is actually helping me any at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it as it stands, and we'll work on it from there. Okay, so let's save this one more time. In our next section, we will actually get into using the sculpt tools, and we will start sculpting on this model.